We're all waiting to find out what's gonna happen with the filibuster because so much rides on it, not least of which HR 1, this attempt to make it so that people can actually vote and fight back against a bit of the racist voter suppression that has been going on as long as our country has been a country, and is once again happening in the wake of this most recent election. Now, we know that racial component of the filibuster exists, that it's been used in that way before. But that is apparently debated by some people who are unfortunately in a position of power in this area. Take a look at what now Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had to say about this.
You argue the filibuster is not rooted in racism. Historians differ on this. Are you concerned about the perception? If it is used against advancing voting rights, certainly the public perception is that Republicans are going to use this tool to make it harder for black people to vote.
Yeah, actually, historians do not agree. It has no racial history at all, none. So there's no dispute among historians about that. I make no apologies for opposing this bill. You've heard Senator Blunt outline the various flaws involved in it. This is all about a power grab. If it were related to civil rights, why were the Democrats using the tool last year and the year before that and the last 6 years? Why is it all of a sudden a civil rights issue when it wasn't for them as recently as last year? Honestly, with all due respect, that is nonsense. This is a power grab. It's all about trying to take over the American election system. It has all kinds of flaws. And under Senator Blunt's leadership, we're going to begin to point them out in great detail starting tomorrow in the Rules Committee.
Okay, so JR, it has nothing to do with race. And not only is that his view, but he can speak for all historians everywhere that they all aren't even in disagreement about it. They all agree that it has nothing to do with race. And he provides what he thinks counts as evidence of that. What do you think?
Well, we've got an issue, as W would say. We got an issue in America. So the issue we've got is that senators, congressmen, anyone who's an elected official is allowed to just lie about these things openly and directly and think that there's no recourse for it, that there's no one's gonna double check that. Because these old men have been in Congress and Senate for 105 years, and they're still used to the days when they can just say whatever they want and there's nobody that can immediately fact check or immediately look up what they just said. But at the same time, we're still listening to them as if they have this authority on the facts. So I don't know if it's a slow burn or if it's a weird transition from insanity to reality, but he's gonna continue to say and do the things he was doing in 1991 now, and then think that he can just get away with it. Only because he continues to get away with it. Now, then you can take to Twitter, you can take to YouTube, you can take to Facebook, you can take to wherever, and people will openly dispute and debunk these lies. And then we'll just move on and say, Mitch McConnell lied again today. Not Mitch McConnell lied again today, and therefore something needs to be done about this. Or we need to disregard everything he says about this topic from now on. Or the next time he answers the question, someone follows up and says, but that's a lie, Minority Leader McConnell. That's not the reality of the situation. Those are the things that won't happen. We're only at this first step of people proving the lies the way we didn't before, because maybe the access to information wasn't there. So now the access to information is there and we prove these lies, then we stop from letting them know, we know you're lying and we're not gonna listen to you anymore. Instead, we're like, hey, Mitch McConnell, we know you're lying. Would you like to have more to say?
Yeah. Unfortunately, no amount of proof is really gonna get through to Mitch McConnell, obviously, because he's not saying it because he thinks it's true. He's saying it because it would be convenient if people thought that it was true.
It would be inconvenient if someone followed up at that press conference and said, why are you lying?
Yeah,
Mitch, what's going on?
That would be
no one, because he doesn't want to be on camera with that soundbite of him having to answer a question about why he's lying. Instead, the soundbite that's gonna live is him saying vehemently how this is not has no racial history. There's no basis that. It's ridiculous. Whenever they come out strong and direct like that, Donald Trump pointed this out. He was very strong in his denial. And that's just the end of the story. I don't care if you're strong in your denial. Murderers also say I didn't do it either, but doesn't mean they didn't do it.
Yeah, or they say it just because they had a bad day. Anyway, so you might be right about that soundbite. So let's throw out another soundbite. He's wrong and he's lying, and it matters that he's wrong. So let's show how he's wrong. Well, we're not really going to show it, but historians are going to show it, even though I had heard that they have no disagreement about this topic. So Kevin Cruz, who is a historian, had this thread of famous filibusters. We are just going to show you a few. There's a very long thread of it, but he points out a filibuster against an anti-lynching bill in 1921. Then they did it in 22 and 25, and then they filibustered a monument to Black World War I veterans in 1926. To give you an idea of how important the stakes have to be for them to roll out the filibuster, they didn't want an acknowledgement of Black soldiers who died in World War I. Let's see, they went back to filibustering anti-lynching bills in 1935 and 1938, and imagine living year by year for decades of them filibustering anti-lynching bills. And then there's a bill targeting racial discrimination in employment. They filibustered that. Truman's civil rights proposals, they filibustered that. Then the civil rights movement started, and what do you know? Filibusters galore in 60, 62, 63, 64. And very importantly, you might think, well, one filibuster a year. No, he's not listing all the filibusters. He specifically says, I'm only using one per year, no matter how many there were. This might represent dozens, hundreds of filibusters against that particular bill.
Right.
Extension of the Voting Rights Act, they filibustered that in 82. Creation of MLK Day as a federal holiday, 1983. Filibuster against civil rights bill again in 1984. Decades and decades and decades and decades of racist filibusters, but there's no history. And nobody doubts that. No historians, certainly, except the ones who actually give a damn about what really happened in American history.
Yeah, so then what's the next step? There's no next step. He's not gonna be confronted with this reality. He's not gonna have to answer to it. And honestly, the people who listen to him and believe his lies, they're not gonna hear it either. That's the most important part. You will hear people repeatedly say,
they watch this show, JR. They watch the damage report.
They'll watch that press conference, or they'll watch Fox News carry that aspect of the press conference, and they'll go with that lie that there's no history to. By the way, there's racist history to every legislative piece that has or hasn't happened in this country, because this country was built on racism. It has to be, in order for them to, every step of the way that we've moved from the beginnings of Africans being brought here to now, has been them fighting that progression every step of the way. We act like we've gotten here because everyone's been so agreeable about getting here. I was saying yesterday, I think I tweeted this, Chuck Schumer said an attack on one of us is an attack on everyone. That's a nice line, it sounds good, but it's just not true. It's not true in this country. There's plenty of people who root for the injustice. For us to act like that would be given a disservice to the fact we need to change it. If we keep saying, hey, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us, and act like all Americans think that way, people become complacent and go, oh, we're already there, we got that. Case closed, because we hear it all the time. People like to say all the time that we've gone so far since our racial history. Look how far we've gotten. Why don't you guys stop complaining? Look at the scene it is today versus what it was in 1960. Sure, but it doesn't mean we're there yet. We got to stop perpetuating the lie that we've gotten where we need to go, especially when you have people that are directly opposing it in legislation. Like, that's proof within itself. We're not there because they're opposing it.
Well, and we shouldn't even need to respond to this, but one of his little arguments there was, it can't be racist if at some point the Democrats used it. Well, first of all, many of those filibusters that we were talking about were by the Democrats. Now, it was a different period of American history. It was before the Southern strategy and realignment and all of that. That's way too much history for Republicans, so I'm not gonna wear them down with that. But I will point out that something being used for something doesn't mean we can't look at how generally is it used, and where most importantly is it used. Now, thankfully, people have done this. I wanna refer to some work that Sarah Binder wrote up in the Washington Post. They wanted to study how the filibuster has been deployed over the last century. So to study filibusters after the Senate created cloture in 1917, she and Stephen Smith counted up measures that were killed by the filibuster. They sought evidence that a majority of the House, a majority of the Senate, and the president favored a measure, and yet it still died after debate on the Senate floor, which means the filibuster was the only thing that was able to kill it. There was unified agreement and control aside from the filibuster. So in doing so, they found that of measures derailed by filibusters last century, civil rights measures dominated. Of the 30 measures we identified between 1917 and 1994, exactly half addressed civil rights, including measures to authorize federal investigation and prosecution of lynching, to ban the imposition of poll taxes, and to prohibit discrimination on the basis of race in housing, sales, and rentals. So it can be used for all sorts of things, but over literally decades, half the time, even when one party had total control, they had control of the Senate, the House, and the presidency, the other side used the filibuster half the time to kill civil rights legislation. That is, like, I know that he doesn't know that, Mitch McConnell, and that he, more importantly, doesn't care about it. But it's important that you know that when people say that it is, like Obama called it, a relic of Jim Crow, it doesn't mean that there were some important cases where it involves race. Half the time was specifically about race. And that's a very important thing for us to know, not only for responding to Mitch McConnell, but also for people like Joe Manchin. For those who are going to try to fight to maintain the filibuster, we needed to deploy accurate history in trying to pressure them to stop doing that.
Yeah, and it needs to be said over and over and over again. And maybe the breakdown needs to have something to do with aspects of these voting rights laws that they're opposing. So if you're against people having access to the polling locations for a usable time or certain communities, point out those specifics in your particular attacks instead of, because I think people get lost in the weeds a little bit and it seems pretty straightforward, but maybe not, So when Mitch McConnell can put his face in front of the camera and say that nothing has ever happened as far as the filibuster on that, you'd be like, so are you fighting against HR 1, right? So we can pass some kind of voting rights that more people can vote. Why are you against it? And then start citing the things that did happen in history and be like, do you agree with that? Do you agree with that? Because that's the same thing you're fighting against right now. The same thing you're fighting against or trying to re-implement that was actually taken out before. No one follows these things as closely as they should, honestly, to know all the details. That's why he can sit in front of a camera and lie like that. Because he knows the majority of people be like, oh yeah, I guess, some guy who's an official said so. Must be the case. They need to be challenged, but they know no one will.
Exactly.
For more political news breakdowns, interviews, stories of activism, and me trying my hardest to care about the occasional big celebrity news story, subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thedamagereport. And you can ring the bell wherever it is so you don't miss anything.